Welcome to another Northern Monkeys video. This time we're looking at the Lieutenant with Combi-weapon and the different combos and detachments that you can synergize with this guy to really get the most out of the unit. Looking at the raw stats of this unit, I think it's pretty sort of emblematic of him as a whole because it's very, very unassuming. He's just your standard sort of Space Marine leader profile. He only has 1 OC and a 3+ save, 4 wounds, just like any other kind of lieutenant. His weapons as well are probably weaker than the average lieutenant, where they might be sporting a plasma pistol and a power fist. This guy's just got his paired combat blades, which do have AP1 now, which is quite nice, but realistically you're not going to get a crazy amount of value out of it. Same for his combi weapon in shooting, it's just a couple of shots that might score a devastating wound against an infantry model. But all in all, even, against something weak like guardsmen or termagants, this guy's only going to kill like 3 or 4 of them in a turn. So that's kind of a bit of a downside to this guy, but this is where the downsides stop as far as this unit is concerned. So when they made this guy kind of the star of the 10th edition launch trailer, they really sort of took that to heart when it came to this guy's abilities. He's absolutely stacked, and in fact we're just looking at the core abilities on this page before we move on to the next one. So this guy has stealth, which is great, always with -1 to hit at range. Very, very useful against certain armies and just sort of always effective. The 5+ feel no pain, this is great again. It makes him, he has that 4 wounds, basically becomes 6 wounds. It's very, very nice. And I think the benefit of this is it just makes him slightly swingy to kill, because your opponent's never going to really know how much damage they need to get through to kill him. If he didn't have that feel no pain, then they just know that, 2 damage attacks get through, this guy's just dead, which is really obviously pretty easy to do. But with that, it just makes him very, very difficult to know when exactly he's going to go down. And once you factor in the stealth to that, it makes shooting a little more unreliable. It can just be really, really good for this guy. And finally, his best things are really the infiltrators and lone operative. It's quite a rare combo to see, even these days with the edition getting a bit more bloated. So this guy, lone operative, you can't shoot him unless you're within 12, which is pretty cool to combo with the stealth, because the fact that he can't be shot, and then even when he can be, he's more difficult to shoot than a normal unit, which is really, really good. And infiltrators, this is a great one, basically allowing him to deploy anywhere, more than 9 away from enemy units, and more than 9 away from their deployment zone. So, great thing about this is, it just lets him get up there, get in position to score those objectives early game, and he can often sort of stand out in the open on a primary piece where other units in your army might get blown away, and just have lone operative, so he's not really at risk of that being shot turn 1, even if you don't go first. Which is really, really nice as long as you sort of take the time to pre-measure, make sure your opponent can't get units into range. And as well as that, he's just generally really, really good at doing that because of his other abilities, which we'll talk about next. So he has 2 fairly unique abilities as far as this unit's concerned. First one is priority objective identified. Basically, when the battle starts, you pick an objective. As long as this guy's alive, your whole army gets reroll 1s against it. They don't have to be near this guy like they did in the Index version of Space Marines. He just has to be alive, which is really, really good because Space Marines with a new oath at the moment gives you 4 rerolls to hit and +1 to wound. If you're also getting reroll wound rolls of 1, just so many of your attacks are being so much more efficient. So it's really, really good. It's just generally a great damage boost for your army, and you can generally with this pick an objective that you know is the one that's going to be fought over a lot. Either the one slap bag in the centre of the battlefield, your opponent's expansion objective if you're being aggressive, or vice versa if your opponent's the one who's going to be aggressing into your side of the board. Maybe you want to pick your expansion objective, sort of the one closest to your deployment zone. So really, really great ability. And keeping this guy alive, relatively easy thanks to all his durability that he has, but also don't forget he has evade and survive. So this is basically once per turn when an enemy unit comes near him, they have to land within 9 of him, he can make a normal move. Now what's great about this is, unlike a lot of these reactive moves, this is just a flat 6-inch move, with it being a normal move. So that's absolutely great because essentially anything that's trying to charge up into this guy, they're always going to have a relatively bad charge against him unless they're incredibly fast and can just walk up to within an inch of him. But even then, it's still a 6-inch, 7-inch charge as he moves away. Quite good. So it just kind of makes him super durable. One thing to watch out for is your opponent can land within 12 of him and get inside of his low knock range, but then still be 9 away from him to not trigger this move. So that's a little thing to watch out for. But this move's absolutely great. Just having that reliable flat 6-inch move can make this guy incredibly tricky for your opponent to pin down. And as well as that, don't forget you can use this move to get onto the other side of a wall, which then allow your opponent to still charge you, but you don't care about that because you've just pulled your opponent's big melee unit onto the other side of that wall, where you can have more like powerful units waiting to blast them to pieces. So all in all, just an absolutely fantastic suite of abilities this guy's got that really just, they buff your entire army and make him a pain to deal with for your opponent. So quite ironically, when I was trying to find a picture of this guy from one of my games to kind of use as an example, I actually really struggled because he's often hidden away in a corner behind a wall. So this is one of the few where I could get where you could actually clearly see him. This is him playing a game against Tau, and he's essentially just the one that can step out onto that central objective, and thanks to his low op, it makes him a real pickle to deal with for the Tau. So he was really great in this game, and overall using him, I've found him to be an absolutely fantastic sort of piece for using in the Space Marine army. He's different to Scouts. I think they're his closest comparison. These kind of action monkey units that zip around the board and have more like abilities that are revolved around utility rather than being a damage dealing piece. So he's different to the Scouts, and I think having one of each of these can be a really, really good balance for your army. I sort of always look to try and slot this guy into a Space Marine army, because often with Space Marines you want your assets for killing your opponent's army and kind of getting the most out of them. So having these sort of cheap, very versatile units that can do all sorts of stuff is really what you want in a Space Marine army. So my two sort of top tips for this guy is, now with his AP1 on his daggers, don't forget, he can be quite damaging, sort of especially if your opponent's got kind of weak, chaff kind of units. Between Oath of Moment, re-rolling his hits, and re-rolling, well, not re-rolling, but getting +1 to your wound, really can actually, yeah, he will do serious damage. And if you need to kill a 5-man unit, use the grenades keyword that he's got, that's really good. Then shoot your combi. You never know, you get a mortal wound, kill another one of them. You'll finish the other 3 off with your melee. So, yeah, don't be expecting the world out of him, but don't forget he can pull off a little bit of damage when you need it. Even if it is just moving up and sort of sacrificing himself to get that grenades on the enemy big unit, like a Land Raider or something important you're trying to take out. And lastly, even though he does have low op and stealth and this reactive move, he can just die if you're bad at positioning. So it's always important to measure out where your opponent can get to in relation to this guy. Like when you're deploying him, think like trying to, either use him to block your opponent's own infiltrators or scouts, or you deploy him in a way where he's going to be safe even if you go second. And just kind of make sure your opponent can't just move into that sweet spot where they're more than 9 away from him but within 12 and just blast this guy. Just another thing, it's difficult to sort of micromanage and keep an eye on, but if you look after this guy, he'll look after you. He can just be incredibly grating for your opponent to have to deal with. In terms of the detachment ability for this guy, I feel like he has a weirdly surprising lack of synergy with Vanguard Spearhead. They have the whole thing where they're much harder to shoot if your opponent is outside of 12 of you, but obviously this guy being a lone operative, that doesn't benefit him at all. But either way, he can get some benefits from being able to go back into reserves, since he's a Phobos unit, which is okay, but I generally find this guy tends to stick around one flank of the battlefield and cause trouble over there, rather than wanting to teleport about the place. However, as per the thumbnail, there is a very funny thing with Shadow War veterans where he can basically, your opponent comes within 9 of him, he moves away, and then they go to charge him and he moves away again. That can just be incredibly funny and annoying that this guy just moves like a potential 12 inches on your opponent's turn. Great stuff. Really good trolling there. And there is also a potential for him to use the Shadow War Veteran enhancement. This, for those that don't know, is the one that lets you basically, you have that Vect aura, where your opponent's stratagems cost more CP within 12 of him. Because he's quite durable and able to get into these little hidey holes and keep himself safe, this guy can be really good for kind of positioning himself. Rather than scouting forward and doing that, he's more, maybe early on in the battle, he does those kind of scouting early objectives, but then he moves back inside of your battle line and sort of makes things like interrupts and heroic interventions and other stratagems your opponents want to use more expensive. But I think that would be a tough ability to kind of get the most out of. And with it being so expensive, it almost adds like 50% to this guy's price tag. Maybe not the best. In Gladius, he doesn't really get the most out of any of the enhancements there. He can't lead a squad to get fire discipline. The Honor Vehement's like okay on him, but you're kind of boosting very middling attacks with that bonus attack and strength. And then the actual Artificer armor gives him a 2-up armor save, which is great, makes him even more durable. But the 5-up feel no pain aspect of that is wasted on him. Still worth it, I think, just for the 2-up save. It can make him really, really hard to kill, since he lacks an invuln. 2-up save is great. But it's not the best, you know. It feels like a weird little inefficiency, and it kind of annoys me. In Ironstorm Spearhead, he's perhaps a good caddy for the Master of the Machine War that can let a vehicle fall back or advance and shoot when it's near him. Generally, a Tech Marine's probably just better, but maybe it'd work. I don't know. He's a cool guy, he's a loner, he's got all those knives. I just don't think he doesn't need a detachment. However, one thing he does need is his dad, and that's Rebooter Guilliman. This guy is Gene Sire. They actually do have a strange little combo that's actually quite effective. Reboot Guilliman basically has this one rule on him that says if you are within 3 inches of an Ultramarines infantry unit, well, a Space Marines infantry unit, but it's got to be Ultramarines to take Reboot Guilliman. Reboot Guilliman gets lone operative, which is good, but obviously like you sort of have that thing of like, oh well, my unit, you've got to expose a unit to protect Guilliman, maybe it's bad. Not with the Lieutenant with Combi-weapon, because he also has lone operative. So those two can kind of like jump around together and generally cause trouble and keep Guilliman safe from enemy ranged fire. It's quite a silly little combo. I don't know how it's supposed to work in the lore, but I just think it's one of those things that Games Workshop never thought of. It's a bit like new Death Guard Demon Princes being able to be shielded from your opponent by there being like Poxwalkers hanging around them. So who knows? I just think this is a fun little combo, and it's worth mentioning that it is an option for you. With the new ability for Loyalist Primarchs to bust through walls, I think this is less relevant than it used to be because Guilliman kind of sits safely behind terrain. But this is still nice if you want Guilliman to kind of stand out in the open and maybe like proactively use him as a heroic intervention threat or something like that. So if you're paying 300 points for Guilliman, pay 70 points for this guy, and you know him and his dad can walk about together holding hands. It's kind of a nice vibe. So thanks for watching. I do think it's really funny that this guy is called Lieutenant with Combi-weapon. It really speaks to the stacked cast of Primaris Lieutenants that was the best thing they could come up with. They couldn't call him like the Phobos Lieutenant because that's probably already taken. It's just really funny to me that that's his name. He's named for his gun. Great stuff, GW. Never change. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I think this is a great little model that came out in Leviathan. People don't love that he's kind of got the Tyranid bits sculpted into him, but I don't know. I think it's okay, and I'm sure you could easily just replace that arm with something else and chop the little guy away from his base, and you'd be fine. You know, give him all sorts of different things. As long as he's got a big knife, he's alright with me. Anyway, like and subscribe. Try and post videos every week. Have a good one.